This is Morning at 10 TV. I'm Arnold Sagawa. Now, in anticipation of the State of the Nation address from His Excellency Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, all eyes are peeled onto what he might have to say, and just giving us a sense of this particular address. I almost called it a speech, but address that we'll be hearing from the President. I'm joined by the Opposition Chief Whip, Mr. Ibrahim Samunjung, and to just give us a sense of what to expect later on today. Ibrahim, many thanks for making time to speak to us. The address, over the past few weeks, we've come to watch the President and get acquainted with so many addresses, of course, given the COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdown. Just give me a sense of what we should actually look forward to in this particular address.
The State of the Nation address is a constitutional obligation under Article 101 of the Constitution. The President, let me not use the parliamentary language, but the parliamentary language is a session, it's a year of Parliament. At the beginning of every year of Parliament, we have been in this 10th Parliament for 4 years now. So we will begin the final and the 5th year this month. Usually it has been on 6th June, now it is going to be on 4th. So the President, under the Constitution, is supposed to come and speak to Parliament and deliver the State of Nation address, in which he must account for the money that we gave him last year in the budget to run the country, explain what that money has done and what it has not, what we have achieved as a country and what we failed and the reasons. That in the Constitution is supposed to be the State of Nation address. Unfortunately for President Museveni, all the addresses he has delivered are deliberately not focused on the period. He will start by his achievements since 1986, and then by the end of sometimes 30 pages speech, there is no accountability for the funds that, because on 11th he will be reading the budget which we have already approved as Parliament. So he ends up deliberately speaking about his achievements. When we came here, this was this, now it is this. For example, last year when he spoke to us, he said by the time the Uganda Manufacturers Association was formed, and he said he himself formed it with the late Murwana, there were 800 factories in Uganda. He now says there are 4,000 something. This is not about what Uganda has achieved since it was formed. It is what you have achieved with the taxpayers' money given to you in 12 months. That's what it's supposed to be. So last year, of course, ordinarily, almost all the addresses will begin or will address the matter at hand. Last year, we had lost a number of people through murders. There had been lots of people being raped here and there. So the focus on the introductory part of his address was on security. But again, his security is not security during the last year. It is security since he came to power, how he has built a professional army, and so on and so forth.
But wouldn't one easily argue that maybe that's him trying to put things in perspective? And the reason why I say that
and you
is...
see, a State of Nation address is supposed to be incrementary, because you have been speaking. You have been speaking, and this will be, I think, the 35th address that Mr. Museveni is making. Of course, I think about 20-something under the 1995 Constitution. So it is not that every year you have to account for the duration that you have been in power. You only account for the resources given to you last year, and the achievements are quantifiable. We will be able as a country to know that last year our target was to achieve the following. I'll give a simple example. If I have given you money for a period of 10 years to construct a 10-story building, and you have reached the 7th floor. So if I ask you to account for the money for the 7th floor, then you don't go to the 2nd and 3rd and so on and so forth. But as long as I have known President Museveni, that's how he speaks. I have had an interaction with him through debate on TV and radio. I have also covered him as a journalist. I remember in 2003 when he opened the Movement National Executive Committee meeting in Chankwanzi. The main issue in the country at that time was the removal of presidential term limit. But he spent the biggest, because he spoke for 2 hours, 1.5 hours, started by the creation of man in Ugobya Mugenyi, in Zimbabwe, and so on and so forth. By the time he addressed the real issue, he spent 1 minute of the 2 hours. So even today, there is a lot of expectation in the public that he will address so many things. But the Museveni, I know, first he will tell the country that COVID-19 is an advantage because now we can industrialize, and then he will give you his photographs when he's inspecting. I saw him commissioning a factory that is going to manufacture face masks. Yeah. This is not a new factory that you go and commission. I was telling someone, Museveni is a very intelligent actor. He can commission one factory 4 times. When they are digging the foundation, he will be there to commission it. When the building, the structure start, then he will go to commission the building. When they paint, he will go. When the products begin coming out. Because the factory went to commission in Mukon is not a new factory. They just turn some of their machines to begin producing. So therefore, he will speak today. Certainly, he will speak about industrialization. I think he will speak about security. And generally, this is must and is going to be a COVID speech.
Right. Thanks for that. Just laying out the lay of the land, or what should we even expect when it comes to this particular State of the Nation address. If you're just joining us, you're watching Morning at NTV. Arnold Sagawa. I'm joined by, to my left, we do have Ibrahim Samujunganda, who is the opposition chief whip, and joining us also to my extreme left is Alana Kembabazi, who's program manager, ISA. To just give us a sense also on the social aspects and, of course, the economic repercussions for not only the address, but COVID-19 and how it is having a trickle-down effect on the social welfare and the well-being of the economy and the country at large, not forgetting the region. Alana, let me just cross over to you. Just COVID-19 wise, we've seen some countries come out and get onto some furlough schemes, just try to protect the social side of things, you know, of this particular seesaw, as opposed to just going on about supplementary budgets. Give us a sense of, on a scale of 1 to 10, how Uganda has fared on that particular side of things.
Yeah, I think this is it's going to be a very unique state of the nation, like you say, because of COVID-19, but also because our national development plan is coming to an end and we're moving to a new phase, ideally. And I think that for a lot of people, COVID-19 has exposed what we have always known, which is that we need social protection, that there is very little resilience for any sort of economic shock. In the World Bank's economic update, for example, they did earlier on, just right before it hit us in February, they were saying that yes, the economy is growing, but we are still very vulnerable, especially for the lower income people. And I think for a lot of people today, the state of the nation, for the ordinary Ugandans who have had to spend months without going to work, who have been locked down. Remember, poverty rates are rising. They were already really bad. 1 in 5 Ugandans were poor before COVID. And a huge percentage of them were actually already vulnerable to slipping back into poverty, and COVID has been that trigger. So many people are coming back, even though lockdown has been lifted, and they don't have jobs. You know, they don't have how they are going to operate. And so for the ordinary Uganda, we focused a lot on the health aspects, I think, of COVID. Can we treat, can we see some recovered patients? But what about the livelihood? Now, I think social protection is very important, and it has to be holistically thought of. That has been a major gap in the government's policy throughout. Because you shouldn't wait for COVID to begin figuring out how to give out food to the most vulnerable. You don't even know who the most vulnerable are, right? We've had piecemeal social protection. We've had social assistance grants for empowerment. Then we had NUSAF in the north. All those were donor funded, and there was always an argument, or concern about whether or not they would even be sustainable, whether or not they would be rolled out. SAGE, for example, only got a tiny percentage of the older citizens. So what happens in this instance where so many people are in need? We need to have an integrated approach to social protection. And I hope that in this state of the nation, he is talking about it from two ways. There is a short term, what is needed right now. So they've started with food, which hasn't even reached Wakiso, for example. And they should be doing cash transfers because, for example, persons with disabilities have reportedly pointed out that that's a better way to reach their category. And that's sort of what they've done, the very basic minimum. But they need to be thinking more long term. They need to think about, are you going to create systems where you can actually create employment for people? In some countries, we've seen public works sort of being pushed as a way to really generate employment. In the long term, you have to think about things like minimum wage, because minimum wage means you're better able to cushion yourself and save.
I really love that you're bringing up the minimum wage, because we do have someone here who sits on a very important floor, and this is a conversation that they've had on that particular level, and it just drags when it comes to a particular point.
Exactly. And the president, for example, has never assented to the minimum wage bill. It's just like he was like, no, I have these issues with it, and sent it back. And then,
Ibrahim, you're awfully quiet.
I think he's waiting for me to get into this.
I am not one of those who are obsessed with the minimum wage.
Right.
In a country where nearly 80% of the population is not working, so you are setting a minimum wage for who? I represent a constituency. I represent a constituency where there are a number of factories. Nearly 90% of people who go to all those factories, and I have had a fight with them, they are without a contract. There are many factories where they are just issued with the numbers. So every morning they give you, every day, either 10,000, 11,000. There is one that employs about 1,000 people.
But a minimum wage is a structural reform that can, a legislative reform that can actually just bolster that particular position and counter such things that you're talking about.
In the case of Uganda, I have said I am one of those who are not obsessed with it. Because majority of people are working, even in informal employment.
Maybe I can clarify this discussion.
They are without contracts.
I am, because I think that we tend to think very short term. So you're saying right now this is sort of where we're at. I'm talking about a social protection program that is systematically rolled out with a plan. You're not, like you've said, like you've rightfully pointed out, so many people live hand to mouth, no contracts, barely earn livable wages, and then something like COVID-19 comes and there's just no buffer. So from that perspective, from a social protection perspective, I think minimum wage is an important thing to look to into the future. But I also want to add that social protection, like I said, is holistic, right? So health and education are also important aspects of social protection. A national health insurance scheme is an aspect where, people don't have to worry about. Imagine a situation where a government said the costs of covering patient, you have to pay for your own treatment or something, right? Kind of like what we saw in Kenya, where they said you pay for your own quarantine, even Uganda they said. But other countries initially played around. In the States, you've seen that, where people say, I'm scared to go to hospital because what about the costs, right? So things like national health insurance scheme are important. And education right now has no clear plan. Like, we had that we were going to move out of, we were going to have candidate classes, and then we were not. And there's a real concern about what the lack of learning is doing for a lot of students. The learning materials have not reached everywhere. And you recognize that when you have health and education right, you have a better chance in the workforce, right? Those are the areas in which we have significant gaps. And so I think this state of the nation is a time for him to really zero down and say, how will the policies we are making really affect the person, the ordinary Ugandan, the one who is struggling to get their financial needs met, the one who is going to even struggle more during this time? And even when you get to the, sort of the economic recovery aspects of it, they're talking about an economic stimulus package. will it trickle down to those people on the ground, to those who truly need it? Beyond like African Development Bank financing, and so there needs to be a proper plan.
You're really touching on some very important points, especially when it comes to things like pumping the prime, the economics of trickle-down economics and maybe supply-side economics. Ibrahim, I want you to jump in here because she's alluded to some idealistic Bretton Woods fundamentals, things like I know when people mention Bretton Woods, it's usually sitting on the fence. You know, they've been known for some very bad things, and but they are reforming. Social safeguards until COVID-19 in this country have been something that maybe we put on the backside of the bicycle, and it's only now that this has happened, that suddenly it's very, very critical to give people posho or know where they actually live, or know how to distribute, or even choose that Wakiso and Kampala will get the posho ahead of each and everyone else. Are the lawmakers, like Mr. Samujunganda here, actually in touch with the grassroots down there to be able to make well thought out decisions regarding social safeguards?
I think the theoretical part of this discussion is to lay out a wish list and then forget about the environment under which you live. Let me just give you a practical example. I grew up in a polygamous family. Time came when almost everybody, including children, were fending for themselves. You had to do all sorts of jobs to buy yourself beddings, books, etc. For a family like that, and that's Uganda, I am just using my own background to give you a picture of Uganda. Almost everybody is on his own. So for a family like that, if you theoretically begin addressing children's rights, first of all, they don't exist at all, and they don't even the children don't think about them.
But when will they?
Children must play, children must do this and that.
This is like the argument of the chicken and the egg. When will they?
That's why I want to go to the point that you mentioned. The president will give figures and impressive, and he will be very happy, because in the last State of Nation address, he said Uganda was the fourth, eventually he reduced and said he was the only country in Africa that has grown, has registered a 6% GDP growth for the last so many years. And he said in Europe it is only West Germany that can compete with us. So that's the theoretical part of it. The practical part of it, which is the point she makes, when you have a shock and you have almost the entire city and its suburbs to feed, that in 1 week people cannot feed themselves. And that's why I said in one of the debates I have had, that when you say we are not going to be hit hard, certainly you are saying the right thing, because we had nothing. So if COVID found you with no money, you cannot claim that COVID wiped away your money, because you never had it. And that's, for me, is the Uganda that Museveni will be speaking to today, a Uganda that cannot buy itself, a citizen that cannot buy himself or herself a mask of 2,500 shilling. And that contradicts all the impressive GDP
north of 6%
growth that Museveni is going to present, because he will tell you that we've grown at this percentage, this country is doing very well. For a country that is doing very well, it is not possible that people can't buy themselves a mask of 2,500. People cannot feed, because even the Wakiso that you are speaking about, the target was to give food to 1.5 million people, both in Wakiso and Kampala. According to the 2014 population census, Kampala has 1.5 million people at night and Wakiso has 3 million. But they said the vulnerable ones are 1.5. Before, the moment they finished Kampala and started with a few areas in Wakiso, they had already hit 1.8 million people. In the constituency where I am one MP, they have distributed food to just about slightly above half. The rest of the constituencies, apart from Machini Savagabo, they have not reached Wakiso. So they have not given 20% of food to people in Wakiso, but the number is 18. I was speaking to colleagues who are involved in this distribution of food. They discovered during this exercise that you even have Ugandans who sleep in taxis. I have seen that happen to Ugandans who work in the Middle East. So you come to Chireka, during the day, they are in taxis. In the evening, the taxis, they are home. That's where they sleep. They came to Kasokoso. They discovered there are people who are sleeping on the veranda. So that's why they said the numbers went to 1.8 very quickly, because we thought we are dealing with homes, established homes. Yeah. So that's the Uganda that we are dealing with. And that's why I said I am going to be reluctant to begin discussing a wage bill when the ordinary person watching you now, he doesn't have even what to do. So the moment you go into the discussion of wage bill, you've gone into a discussion to cover you, myself, and her.
Right. I see where you're coming from. Definitely the informal economy is something that we need to be cognizant of before we have such elitist conversations of maybe a minimum wage bill. But I want to refer you, Elena, to the IMF, the International Monetary Fund's Article 4. Now, they were here just last year, and one thing actually stuck out. Ibrahim here is alluding to the fact that the president in his last address is boasting of a GDP growth of north of 6%, which is great. I wouldn't say it's the best on the continent. Cote d'Ivoire has been doing well. Rwanda has been doing well. Don't get me started on Ethiopia. But this is a time where we might need to rethink basic macroeconomic indicators like GDP. And I'm thinking you actually subscribe to this particular school of thought. Now, the IMF does say, this is quite interesting, progress on social indicators has been mixed. This is quote unquote. Uganda ranks 125 out of 156 countries in the UN Sustainable Development Goals Index. On the positive side, children and maternal mortality rates have been reduced, and literacy and numeracy improved until 2010. But have stagnated since. Primary education completion rates have declined. 2 decades of formidable gains. Poverty reduction has stalled in the 4 years to 2016. About 70% of the population depends on agriculture. Women, the youth, and workers with limited skills struggle to find employment in the formal sector, alluding to what he said. You know, we could have this conversation around the minimum wage till tomorrow, yet the youth, which constitutes over 60% of the population, cannot even find a job in an AC office. Now, is it time we rethought this premise? GDP growth is looking good. We expect to grow north of 6.5%.
Yeah. First of all, I want to clarify. I am not here saying we're looking at minimum wage in isolation. I am saying that social protection is a holistic endeavor. And by the way, ISA has a conference on Sunday where we are really going to get into this, because I think the time is quite short to show you how minimum wage connects to a better life for everyone. Because you are absolutely right when you think about the fact that any form of social protection right now has often left out the informal sector. And then for ordinary Ugandans, like you said, we focused a lot on GDP when reporting on the State of the Nation addresses, and not thought about what it means for them. And I do believe, and the World Bank and others will agree, that social protection is a form of ensuring inclusive growth that actually does trickle down. So what we would like to see for a change, because the State of the Nation is coming up, the budget is coming up, is more than mere rhetoric, right? We want to see a plan that says, this is what we are going to be having, and these are the categories, an integrated plan. We have a national social protection policy as Uganda, which is barely implemented, but at least does show how holistic everything is. And the rubric, the thing that we should always remember, whether it is the lawmakers, because they are in charge of passing the budget, so we do have issues with also how we feel they've funded adequately social protection, or the president, what most Ugandans want to see is something that is going to actually transform their lives in some tangible way. We have a social contract with the state, which means it's supposed to take care of us. And particularly for the most vulnerable, the older persons, the persons with disabilities, the poor people, like you said, and now we have a growing number of that, what again could that look like, right? And we're really wanting to sort of spell it out and say going forward, and I say this at the beginning, that this is a pivotal time, not just because of the fact that there's COVID, but because we're moving into our next phase of the National Development Plan, which means we're setting the tone for the next 5 years. So we would like to see something that is that really will work towards really transforming the lives of Ugandans by really investing in social protection, in health, in education, in increased things like SAGE, but not just piecemeal programs, like a real integrated approach with significant political backing.
If you're just joining us, you're still watching Morning at 10 TV. Live pictures coming your way from Chireka and Nansana. Today is quite an eventful day for our taxi operators and all the operators in the public transport space. They are back on the roads today, and as you can imagine, the traffic officers are also very busy in their offices today, and making sure that everyone, for starters, does have a face mask, and they're also alluding to the directives that were made very clear by the president. Again, I am joined by Ibrahim Samujunganda, who is the opposition chief whip here in the studio, and Elena Kembabazi, who is a program manager with ISER. Ibrahim, Elena here just touched on the national development plans, and I've read a few of these, and for me, they look like a very fascinating brochure, because we do not do a very good job in accounting for the past ones. So it could be 1, it could be 2, it could be 3, and after a while you get a sense that, you know, maybe NDP 1 looked quite good, but after that we moved on to another one. Is there any sense of accountability before we jump into another development plan, or is it just something that we put together, you know, appease the funders, appease the FDB, appease the World Bank, and we're like, you know, we have this nice thing on paper?
It's a difficult question. I have argued with colleagues who are in the ruling party in parliament and in the media. First of all, as a country, I don't think we have an idea of what we want to do.
It's a bit green.
If you look, for example, at Dubai, they took a decision that they are going to build their economy on 3 pillars, what they call the 3 T's: transport, tourism, and trade. Every single thing that they do is to facilitate those 3 pillars. For a couple of years now, the president said we are going to concentrate on energy, on roads, on ICT, and agriculture is not usually one of them. But that's why I have the biggest percentage of the population. When he was presenting the budget last year, he said Uganda had been turned into a big supermarket, that we continue buying stuff from China, the Middle East, and everywhere, and we sell to them less or even half. Until you've formalized the section of your economy maybe to at least about 40%, and then you've decided what you want your economy to be. There was a time the president said we are now going to promote agriculture and agro-processing, that all your factories, the factories he keeps speaking about, must be factories that are benefiting the biggest section of your society. If you came to the area where I'm an MP, where you get the Chireka, you need to ask yourself, of those factories that the president is commissioning today, which one is processing what the people in Ruwero, in Masaka, in Mbarara are growing? The biggest, as you go on Namgongo Road, it's a factory for these artificial hair for women. The one is imported, I don't know from where. It employs about 1,000 people who are paid 5,000 every day. So these are the sort of factories that the president, and that's why there is a, so there is no linkage between the biggest section of the population and the growth in manufacturing And today he will tell you that manufacturing has grown. He will be singing all the words that we learned in economics when we were in secondary school, import substitution, and he will be very happy, painting a picture of a country that is on the move. But you can also move when you don't know where you are going. And I don't want to be harsh, but I always tell them, please tell me where are we going. So tell me, what are the pillars of Uganda's economy? Tourism just grew by itself because there are many people who want to come and see wildlife. I told the MPs one time we were on a flight with my friend Moses Biaranga, who is the senior presidential advisor. And the old woman, air hostess, said, I want to go to Kilimanjaro during the Christmas period. So Moses tried to market Uganda, please come to Uganda where everything is good. We have more of this chimpanzee. And the woman said, your country is chaotic. We usually stay in Entebbe when we fly to Uganda. But there was time when we were supposed to stay in Kampala because the hotels in Entebbe had been overbooked. Said, on your road, animals are crossing, children, trucks. Oh, you can't go. I'll go to Kilimanjaro. So I was telling MPs that to grow your tourism, you don't only protect the animals that are in the park, but you must also sort out the mess on the roads from Entebbe to Kampala and all the way to Kasese and so on and so forth. So therefore, I at the moment, if you look, for example, at the amount of money that we allocate to the tourism sector, it will tell you what is our tourism is. Because the budget of the whole Ministry of Tourism is just a budget of, I think, about less than 100. I looked at the State of National Address last year, and the President said, now, I'm sorry, I may divert. He said, to help agriculture, we are going to put money in UDB. And for the last 5 years, the amount of money that is put in UDB is 270 billion shilling. That is equivalent to the budget of donation under State House, because last year the donation under State House was 280 billion. And the President came to announce to the country, very happy, that to grow agriculture and agro-processing, we have put over a period of 5 years, 270 billion in UDB you can go and borrow. So just imagine, I mean, these are the priorities. We keep quarreling with them, but of course you can't win. They are the majority. So when it comes to voting, they will vote. Just imagine, you want to grow agro-processing and agriculture, and you said the smaller entrepreneurs, they come and borrow from UDB. For a period of 5 years, 270 is the amount that you have put. For donation, the money that the President moves with, last year, the budget was 270. So if you understand the budget of Uganda, sometimes you don't even need to listen to the State of National Address. We've already finished the budget. The President has outlined in the budget what he wants to do next year. We had an argument with them, but of course, because of numbers, again, they won. You have 219 billion shilling that you're going to spend on workshops in hotels that are closed. You have 160 billion shilling for travel abroad with borders, including yours, closed. You have, so if we want to understand, because the President will come and give very impressive figures, the MPs will clap wherever they will be. I don't think I want to go and provide an audience to a President who wants to speak to Parliament from his bedroom. The others can go. I'm told you will stay at Parliament, then you will be on TV watching him. I can watch him from wherever I'll be. So therefore, the point I make here, until you have decided what you want to be, then you work to achieve that. I was in Ethiopia. I've gone to Ethiopia a couple of times. The President visited. He was impressed by the army there. They have a car assembling plant. They do most of it. Of course, most of the parts are imported, but about 15 to 20% are.
It's more an assembly plant, yeah.
No, so he said, we want to start it. He saw how the army there is involved in agriculture. He said the army in Uganda, through the National Enterprises Corporation, which is the trading arm of UPDF, they must begin agriculture. They went and bought a farm from Chisos. That farm had 800 heads of cattle. It now has 0. And then later he says, now to grow agriculture, I need to get the military back. I get Saleh with the veteran. He says, now you grow agriculture. They have never accounted for what happened to the farm. He said we can now build a military hospital because the military is very good. The military bought, at that time, it was the biggest private hospital in Uganda, the one of Chiseka. It used to be the like Nakasero of today. Handed over to the military, it was run down. So therefore, the President, intelligent, he maneuvers around, and because you have a lot of people who are growing, young people, they will think now, oh, what is mentioning? So therefore, until we have decided as a country that this is our focus and all our money goes there, because if in one go you can go and procure fighter jets, you even go and raid the reserves. I had wanted to see that. I went to do farming, by the way, in Mukono. Said I want a tractor. It was an experiment. I put in 3 million shilling as an experiment. At the time of harvest, I got 1.7. I had thought people around me where I have a land in Mukono, maybe they are lazy, they don't want to. After that experiment, now I realized why agriculture people can only hide there, because they have nothing else to do. And that's why most of the young people are selling plots of land, come to Kampala for border. Now he has announced you can do away with borders that employ about 2 million people.
Elena, let me bring you into the conversation here. He's touched on quite a few issues, but I also want you to allude to the fact that the fiscal deficit is well, it was projected at what, 5.4% of GDP by close of last year. With COVID happening, the IMF facility that is 1.8 trillion, what, 491.5 million US dollars. Is it time we actually started to raise the flag?
You know, I think that, and I agree with him that you have to look at both today's State of the Nation address and next week's budget speech together, because, you know, they really are the actual plan, right? And I think it's very easy to get swept up in the numbers. To either think like, wow, this budget is really big, it's going to make a difference, right? Because we've seen so much, they say they put a lot of money, for example, to health, there's a lot of supplementary budgets and so forth, and I feel like there's just a shroud there of accountability issues that people need to be looking carefully at. And then you also have to think about the debt, the amount of debt we're taking on, and whether that's going to be ultimately sustainable. But for me, aside from all of that, aside from the sort of the fiscal deficit, the debt discussions, you know, what I'm always interested in, what I think we should all be focusing on is, what does it mean? For example, we're talking about like the people in Wakiso who are farmers, right? Or the border pass. Like, how is this going to actually improve their lives? Is this what they would want? And I think that with COVID, there's been a real lack of participation. You know, in the past, the budget process was a bit more participatory, but with COVID, all of that kind of, at least from the perspective of people participating, we're supposed to have a bottom-up process and some of these discussions. It was really left to our legislators, and we know there was a lot of scandal around that too. And so I think the participation elements for the ordinary Ghanaian right now, they're thinking, is this money going to ever reach us? Is it going to transform our lives? Are you going to put it in the areas where we need to, right? When I've told you, for example, the most visible form of social protection in this program has been the SAGE program, which is barely like you know, the issues with government financing it have been there for a really long time. So for a lot of ordinary people, they're thinking in this period where we expect the government to cushion us, where we cannot necessarily go out and hustle like we always could, what is this going to mean? And I think that question has to be answered, and I think there has to be a more concerted effort in the future to ensure participation of those people beyond the parliamentarians, right? And again, I'm really, and this is very particularly important because we are going to have to get to the accountability aspect. If there's any money that's being borrowed right now, we and our children are going to be paying it back. And so we need to feel like it actually goes where it matters. He gave an example of, you know, you're saying you're backing agriculture, but let's look at the details, right? They always say the devil is in the details. And what we've seen, for example, from our budget analysis, that over time, the social sectors and social protection have been historically underfunded. And there's been this skew towards, again, sort of big manufacturing, building roads, and again, the idea that growth will just trickle. This will trigger growth and it will trickle down, which hasn't happened, and COVID has just exposed that. So I think, you know, aside from all the analysis, and I could get into that, but I think for the viewers out there, the question I'd encourage you to ask is, what is this going to benefit me? And I think that people should recognize that issues like social protection are not only just fundamental human rights that our Constitution guarantees, but they're also issues of national security, because we know what happens when there's so many people that are unemployed, are left to fend for themselves, are just completely left out of the of any sort of cushion from what is happening right now. We also know that the issues of public health, you're not going to have people comply with your social distancing measures if you're not able to enable them to be able to live a basic life in dignity, something, to have food at home, right? And so they're not idealistic issues. And I think that the proof is in the pudding. We should really be looking, one, at today's address, but again, it's an address. Two, next week, at the budget. And I think people have different levels of awareness of sort of whether, how the budget has played out, in part because there have been loads of supplementaries and loads of,
that's the other thing I wanted to
craziness
touch.
there. So
I want to call it a perennial, but it's even it's like an annual event. The budget is passed, but then there's a supplementary, and if you are to look close at the supplementary, there's always some very, very usual suspects, not even suspects, there's some usual names where on the supplementary, it's almost hands down, they will reappear. Is that a sign of poor planning in the first hand from the Ministry of Finance? Or someone could easily argue there are economic shocks, there's things like COVID that are going to prop up of nowhere. But even before COVID, there's always going to be a supplementary.
Yeah, exactly. I think that either way, it just makes it hard from an accountability perspective, right? Because in the traditional sort of budget process where you have a budget framework papers, ministerial policy statements, all of that, usually citizens have some form of participation in that, and sort of to say, well, does this reflect what it should be reflecting? And then you get these supplementaries, and I would be, the lawmakers must be like, wait, I just finished one, then there's another, and then some, and then things get sneaked in. But before you switch to Ibrahim, right, I just want to say that I like what you've put as as the title of this show, COVID-19, the state of a changed nation. Because for me, that's truly what I think me and a lot of Ugandans are expecting out of this, that this should have been this thing that kind of whipped us into shape, that showed this is ridiculous, that showed that we just cannot continue to operate in the ways in which we have, where we just cater for only a certain section of society, and we find very skillful ways to do that, whether it is through, passing, just sneaking things into the budget and lack of accountability, which takes away money that we could use for health and education and other social protection programs, or from a policy perspective, just saying things and not really doing them. And so we really need to see a changed nation, and that's what we are hoping to see from this process.
Ibrahim, I just wanted to touch on two things. One is this supplementary issue that has become a very, very usual fixture in the country and on the floor of Parliament. And the other is around the Malabo Declaration. So Uganda, definitely a member of the African Union, and you wake up and you have a declaration that is quite decent, If the continent does thrive, over 60% of the Africans in sub-Saharan Africa, well, AU members, do thrive on agriculture and agricultural related activities. It's only fair that close to 10% of the fiscus is towards agriculture. Now, everyone signs the dotted line. It's a very happy day. All the presidents actually pose for a nice photo shoot in Malabo. And fast forward a few years later, no one is doing it. Uganda, no exception. Are we investing that 10% of GDP in agriculture? Okay. You and I know, maybe not. So just touch on those two things. So the legislation is there, or the declarations are there to help us achieve this broad-based growth. We just look the other way.
Under the Public Finance and Management Act, government is allowed, is authorized to spend 3% of the budget in supplementary without prior approval of Parliament. Then they can come to seek approval to show there was an invasion of locusts, we spend so much, and therefore we've come to...
There was a loud laugh there on the locust issue.
Yes, because when we are making the law, we assume that the thing like those can happen, where the government cannot correct the MPs very quickly, and then you pass a budget. If you want to spend more than 3% of the total budget, you must seek prior approval of Parliament. And in our rules, we made it categorical that the amount for which you are seeking a supplementary approval must be unavoidable, must be of an emergency nature. Unfortunately, ourselves within Parliament, because the last time they brought, because we've now dealt with about 4 or almost 5 supplementary requests, and we've approved all of them. So we make the arguments, but of course the arguments are never going to win in Parliament. It's going to be the numbers. Because we said let's subject the request to the test that we ourselves wrote down in our rules. Is this unavoidable? Is this an emergency? And then people made Parliament, the MPs will make arguments, and you begin asking yourself whether you are in the same Parliament. Because, as you said, almost in every supplementary request, the first beneficiary will be State House. Second beneficiary will be UPDF. And then they can use the emergency. If it is locust, then they will put locust, so it becomes, because even when you look at the supplementary for COVID, which was about 300 billion shilling, yes, 104 billion went to health, but the rest of the money went to the usual departments.
Yeah,
but that was preceded by another.
But then again, isn't that your prerogative as a lawmaker to question and ask that if you're saying that 400 billion Uganda shillings is going towards classified defense, Ibrahim, are you asking these questions on the floor, or is it?
The rules are very difficult. First of all, the auditing of supplementary.
Do you know what classified defense is?
I don't know. And this
have you asked that question before?
Yes, because
and what was the
under the rules, the Speaker of Parliament is supposed to appoint a committee of 3 people to look at the audited accounts of the classified expenditure. So already the expenditure itself is separate, but even the scrutiny is separate, and there is no report to Parliament. So last year, even in the budget that is going to be presented next week, it has about 4 trillion shilling, which is going to be classified expenditure, and those are the rules. So you can argue, sometimes you even stand there and insult each other, but it's going to be passed. Now guys, going to...
guys, I'm afraid we're actually running out of time. Just allow me to give you just under 30 seconds to just sum this up. I'm very sorry. We're actually running very, very late. Elena, let me just start with you. Ibrahim, you'll sum it up.
Yes, like I said before, we are hoping for a State of a Changed Nation address. And so it's a tough line for him to deliver, one that really pays attention to the needs of ordinary Ugandans, that prioritizes social protection. I know we haven't had enough time in this period to get into social protection. Like I said, there is a conference we're having on NTV on Sunday, 1:30 to 4 p.m., where we really hope people will tune in and give their views, because we do want to really put this on the national agenda, because we do think that it's about time. It's just Ugandans deserve more, and they deserve a state that takes care of them, especially in this very difficult time. And we hope that our legislators and the president are listening.
All I can say, in America, everybody who has lost a job has registered. They have an idea of what they are dealing with.
And furlough in the UK.
Yeah.
That's what we ought to have done in Uganda, to begin registering people who have been affected and the magnitude, and then you propose. But sometimes I am told that if you can't meet people's expectations, you lower them. Maybe that's what the president has done. So here he's going to give a State of Nation address without knowing how many people have lost jobs, how many companies have closed, how many companies have cut salaries, and then he will say, this is a grand opportunity to grow industrialization.
No conjecture here. Be sure to catch the State of the Nation address today. We'll be airing it live right here on NTV Uganda. We also do have coverage starting at 11 a.m. Josephine Karunji will be there. I will also be there. Emmanuel Mutaizibwa. Not forgetting Malcolm Musime to just give you those very complicated graphs that the president might delve into. Let's take a quick... actually, Walunyolo is joining us, but allow me to just thank my guests. To my left, I do have Ibrahim Samunjunganda, who is the opposition chief whip. To my extreme left, Alana Kembabazi, who is a program manager. Isa, for making time to speak to us. Let's shift gear, take it to Ivan Walunyolo, who's joining us on the street. I can see it is raining just a bit. To just give us a sense of what public transport resuming today actually looks like and what it means for us, ordinary folk. Ivan?
From Abaita Babiri. This is one of the biggest stages we have here in Entebbe, where people come to board taxis to Kampala and all other places neighboring, of course. But we know today is the first day when the public transport has resumed operation. But as I speak right now, I've been here for about 30 minutes, but I've only seen one taxi that is taking people to Kampala. And I've been told that even if these taxis have been allowed to operate, they are coming not as they used to be, but you see one after 15 minutes, you see another. And just like you can see in my background, those are the people who are waiting for the taxis, but they did not see them. Some of them have been interrupted by the rain, and if my camera person can show you the other side, they're taking a shade, as you can see. But the taxis on the road are not as many as they used to be back then. I cannot tell whether the problem came from the registration process or something went wrong but the taxis are not many as they used to be. But of course, we are seeing private cars walking the road, and some of them are now doing, passenger. They're coming here to pick passenger. I'm told from Entebbe to Kampala, one is required to pay between 80,000 to 10. But remember, back then, someone would pay 2,500 in the morning, but then from Kampala to Entebbe, you would pay around 3,500 or 4,000 at some point. But then, as I told you, I have not seen taxis at all. Only one at a time, 15 minutes before you see another. But back then, you would see about 5 of them come to Paka once at the stage to collect passengers. So it is not like it used to be back then. But I can't tell what really the cause is.